So I don't know how well you can see it. I'm using my GoPro again, but I thought this time I'd keep a little video log of this build. I don't know how many installments it'll be, but this is kind of the official day one of putting together my air-cooled superbike, I guess I'll call it. But it'll hopefully look pretty unique by the time I'm done. So you can see over there, that's the chassis of my 900 SS IE, and with this coronavirus, I'll blame that. I'll blame a global pandemic on having too much time on my hands and deciding, it's just something I've always wanted to do, and now's the time to do it. So it was a pretty neat bike. I was able to put it together and ran okay, but the interesting thing is I was able to sell off a bunch of the parts. As you can see, there's still some parts left over. It's the flawed economy of bike building to say that you're breaking even. I'm not. But I'm not, I'm not bleeding money into this thing. For example, with the SS, I bought the Öhlins shock from Germany, got it rebuilt, and to finance this project, I sold it for, I think it was $650 US. So I made Canadian dollars in the toilet. So I made money on the shock, and then for this chassis, I bought an Öhlins S4R shock for half the price of what I sold the 900 SS shock for. So, like I said, it's not like I'm making money on this thing, but I'm able to save a bit of money on selling parts from my previous project to build this. So what we've got here is a 1098 frame. Bought it out of California. Comes with a title. It's been sandblasted already, and they were pretty aggressive with the sandblasting, so you can kind of make out the fact that there was a VIN number stamped on there, but it's going to be hard to pull that out. So I think there is a way of registering custom frames, which I think is what I'll call this when I go to put a plate on it. Or, you know what, maybe when I go to get it safety, I've got the paperwork and title for this. Maybe the guy will not take a hard look at the VIN number, but depending on the light, you can see that there is a VIN number stamped in there. And I guess if they can, if the RCMP can find filed off serial numbers on weapons, maybe we can pull that VIN number off there anyway. So this is the joy of being in a small town, relatively speaking, on the Canadian prairies. If you're going to get anything sandblasted, it's like you're sandblasting the chassis of a Massey Ferguson. So pretty coarse, but the paint came off, and it did make it easier to weld some stuff on. So I had to cut off the piece here that attaches to the swing arm, and I've capped that off. Did some oxyacetylene welding, and it's so simple to prep because, of course, there's no paint on this. It's nice and clean, and so the metal plate that I welded on there, I just had to cut it to fit and hit it with a wire wheel and then weld it on there, and not a whole lot of or any impurities in the weld from what I can tell. Obviously this is going to be powder coated when the dry build is done. So this is the 900 SS engine, and it's funny. This box is one of my favorite tools in the garage. It's an old wooden apple box that I found somewhere, and I brought it home, and it has supported 3 900 SS engines, about 4 or 5 single-cylinder engines, and actually I built my 1200 Bandit by putting that huge, heavy Suzuki 4-cylinder air-cooled lump on this thing, and it's held up. So this fits this Ducati engine perfectly. It was like it was designed in Italy to fit Ducati engines. So anyway, it's the magic apple box. If you ever find one of these things, your wife drags you out antiquing or something like this, take them home, because they're amazingly strong, and they just happen to fit this perfectly. So I got the frame and seat subframe for I think around $320 American with a title, which is amazing. Sandblasting has revealed that there's no dents. It hasn't been in a crash. The steering stem isn't bent or anything like that. And living in Canada, the scary thing is, oh geez, you got to ship it up to the Great White North here. For some reason, I got it shipped for 23 bucks. Like, there's no way it cost 23 bucks to ship this thing when this fuel tank, which came from Ontario, one province over, through Canada Post, cost me $60 Canadian to ship. So anyway, like, what do? You win some, you lose some, I guess. But it was kind of nice that the frame came up in good time, and they didn't gouge me on shipping. So I'm already starting to do some figuring as to where to locate some of the ancillaries, like the battery. So this is a lithium-ion battery, weighs a pound. This turned over my Bandit, so I know it'll turn over this Ducati. This might be a good spot for it. I just cut and modify the subframe to put a little saddle in there. I'm not going to be carrying a passenger, so a race tail will fit over that. There's also tons of room up underneath the fuel tank here, but of course the fuel inject, like throttle bodies, all have to go in here first. So that's the deal with a dry build, right? You get the engine in the frame, and then you start having to weld on little brackets or tabs or sort out where everything's going to go. So yeah, the battery could go up underneath here. I've seen some guys put the batteries right up here. I like it being up underneath the tail section, but that could mean some longer wires, extending the wires out to the back, that sort of thing. So we'll have to see. The wiring loom I'm going to use is from a 2000 and 2001 Monster, so the Ducati 900 SSIE that used this engine, and the old style ECU, because this mess is the 900 SS wiring loom that comes with these bikes, and it's fine, it works, but it's got this stupid block connector here that connects to here, that sat on the outside of the frame. Now of course it was covered up with a fairing, but when you're going to run a naked or semi-naked bike, there's just way too much stuff here. So I'm hoping that the inherent fairingless nature of a Monster will have less extra excess wiring that I'll have to find or crimp or cut or whatever. And you know, you take a look at something like this, you know, and cutting this off and then individually soldering or connecting the wires from here to here would be a bit of a nightmare, you know. And like this, for example, is for the gauges and the left and right hand side switchgear. So again, like a complicated setup, so hopefully the Monster wiring harness is simpler. Because they only sold that harness for 2 years, it was kind of hard to find the right wiring harness, but I did track one down on eBay, and I think it'll work. So of course the single-sided swing arm, which is pretty sexy. This is an S2R from, I think they had a S2R 1000 and an S2R 800. They're the same. So I got the swing arm from a great guy down in Tucson, Arizona, Scott Wilson, who runs Italian Iron Classics. He does some really neat things with bikes. If you Google Italian Iron Classics, he's got some really neat machines, really neat kits, and it was a bike that he helped build, which kind of inspired me to do this. He did essentially the same thing with the liquid-cooled ST3 engine. Him and a couple of Dutchmen built it, and very cool looking bike. So this is an air-cooled, should be a bit simpler. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for, to copy that basic idea. As you're building something like this, you don't want to get ahead of yourself. You don't want to start painting things before you've even heard it run. Made that mistake before, but I'm already starting to think about an exhaust solution. So I'm not sure if a S2R 800 header will work with a 900 SS engine. Like, theoretically the stroke in a 900 engine is longer than a 800 engine, but are we talking, Like we're probably talking millimeters here. So I guess I'm on the lookout for a header system. I know nothing's going to bolt on, but at least something that'll get me close where some cutting and shutting and a bit of adapting, and maybe I can tack it together and get my TIG welding guru to finish it off. I'm pretty sure already that the 900 SS headers won't work because it's just this little area here that the header pipe has to go down, and it just doesn't seem to sit right. But before, again, I start buying stuff online or on eBay, you know, obviously I need to get this into rolling chassis mode, get the shock in place, get the push rod in place, get the rocker in place. There's some wonky big long bolt that goes, you know, all the way through here. So I need to do that first before I start looking at exhaust systems again. The other thing too, considering that big long wonky bolt, is the idea that I've got almost everything I need, but there's always a couple of little bits missing. So, you know, I'm missing a spacer here, and I'm missing a couple O-rings that keep the brake plate from rattling back and forth here. You know, these rear brake rotor bolts are extra short so they don't foul on the wheel hub when they put it in there. So, you know, I think I'll go through Ducati Omaha. Partial to those guys. They put on amazing track days down in the States, of which I've been to a bunch, and their online microfiche is really easy to use. You'd think, oh my God, I gotta order parts from the Italians. This is going to be a nightmare. I still might have to wait for it to be shipped out from Italy, but at the same time, you know, their part numbers is all online and it's really easy to read. So I'll be doing that. The front end is actually going to be from a Triumph 675 for purely aesthetic reasons. 675 wheels are one of the lightest OEM wheels you can get, and this lovely thing from a Multistrada is a 5-spoke that will bolt onto the back. So, you know, I always like the front wheel spoke to match the rear wheel, so 5 spokes in the front, 5 spokes in the back. According to All Balls, the bearing supply company down in the States, they have a bearing, tapered roller bearing that will fit the outside diameter of the steering stem and then the outside diameter of the Street Triple forks, which is basically what I put on my Street Triple here. It was originally a base model, but I put on R model forks and radial brakes, so this will have the same thing. I faffed about and put on R6 brakes on my street bike here, but or this is going to, I'll call this my dual purpose bike because I also intend to do track days on it as well. Not quite ready to retire from track riding yet, but with this one I'll just use the Triumph radial calipers. And again, you know, you do some good searching on eBay, you get things for a decent price. Sometimes you just have to wait for it. So I guess the other thing is that I'll have to do some more research on. So these throttle bodies, when they're bolted on, they have a fuel pressure regulator in line of the fuel return line, which would go right up underneath here. So when guys have done mods like this before or done some engine transplants, they talk about needing to delete one of the two fuel pressure relief valves, because there's, on the 900 SS, it's on the throttle bodies, or it's part of the throttle body system. And with some of the 1098 and 848 tanks, I've seen the pressure relief valve on the tank itself. But I don't see anything here. I don't see anything on the tank. So before I start chopping out pieces of a fuel system, I need to make sure that there is if there is a fuel relief valve somewhere in this 1098 tank, exactly where it is. So it's still early days, and obviously the throttle bodies have been removed, and I still have some work to do to even look at putting them on yet. A couple surprising things is that these are special engine bolts to run frame sliders, and I think I will, because these cases here, I know people talk about frame sliders causing bikes to flip if they're sliding, but the frame sliders on these are very short. But anyway, again, this is from this is a superbike frame, and you'd think everything would be a bit wider to deal with, you know, a 4-valve head and that sort of thing. But I need to check this, but I think I need to cut the threads here a bit deeper on the bolt, because these are threaded in and not super tight, but threaded in until it's seated, and obviously these are too long. So there's a machinist in that small town where I work that can thread those a bit longer if I have to, and cut them to fit. So when the bearings come in for the steering head, I'm obviously not going to bash them in while the frame is still on the engine. I'll take everything out, press them in properly, and then at that point I'll have a chance to measure these frame bolts to make sure they're the right length. I've got a few X's on some tabs I think that will be redundant, but again, I learned the hard way over the many projects I've built. You don't start grinding off tabs until you know you actually don't need them. Like, this to me seems redundant, but who knows, this could, you know, be the answer to where I bolt something really important onto the bike. So these things here, though, up here for mounting the big side fairings, and I really can't see me wanting those on there anyway, because it's going to be a semi-naked design. As you can see, there's nothing like building a bike. You got to at least be bleeding a bit by the time you're done for the day. Foot peg mounts, what's going to happen there? Well, I'm going to use some aftermarket Monster rear sets. So they mount up, I think, here and here. I'll remove this stub, and then to here, and then the plate attaches out here. So by getting rid of this, which didn't fit anyway, like this, the orientation from here to here to here wasn't exactly right with an air-cooled engine. Here to here hasn't changed since the 70s on Ducatis, but I had to cut this piece off here. So then I'll use Monster rear sets on this piece. And there seems to be some relatively inexpensive ones from China. They claim that they're made of 6061 billet aluminum. You know, is it worth a $150 risk to try them? Or should I wait and spend some more money and get Woodcraft rear set plates, and just the plates, because I've got enough hardware and leftover pieces that I don't need a full system. I have to think on that one. Oh yeah, I think that's where we're at for now. Just at the point of needing to be patient and waiting for parts to show up in the mail. You know, a lot of this stuff needs to be sourced overseas. Like, the best price I could find on a 520 aluminum sprocket for this hub was from France. And I even put in a cheeky bid of, I don't know, brand new aluminum ergal, 30 euros, and he took it. So, you know, it's just, now I just have to wait for it to get here from France. So patience is a virtue, I guess. So yeah, that's where we're at right now, and as the work gets done and things get completed, I'll post another video. Check back soon.